With some of my favorite shows falling under anything that Mindy Kaling creates, when I found out that there was a master class of her teaching writing, I was so excited to dive in. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Christina and I make videos about writing and publishing. So if that's something that interests you, please make sure to hit thumbs up and hit subscribe. And if you've been here before, welcome back. So I learned a lot and I want to summarize it all for you today. And the first thing that I noticed is that Masterclass comes on strong with the storytelling. The class opens up with Mindy Kaling stating that at a young age, her parents told her for extracurricular after-school activities, all she was allowed to do was either read and write, and I believe she includes watching television in there because she essentially says she spent all her free time watching shows and taking notes on shows, and most notably a lot of comedy shows. So her master class focuses on how to write a pilot for a comedy episode, but I fully believe everything in her class can be applied for us to learn when we write our books. And so we get this nice little montage of like her as a kid and then her stumbling along the way and then her achieving success and all these like pictures of her on talk shows. And then she hits us with a really good quote, which is that we don't actively see the solitary act of a writer writing. So throughout this class, she gives us a bunch of different writing assignments, and a lot of them are specific to TV, but I've done you a favor and I've translated them all into how we can use them for our books. And if you are here and you're not a writer and you just wanted to know what is in Mindy Kaling's masterclass, stick around because that is what this video will cover. It really shows us how to break down storytelling, and what I really like is that Mindy mentions there's not really any barrier to entry from this craft. Like, we can access so much content, we can analyze so much content, we can essentially study the content that we like and the content that resonates with us, and then we can use it to inform our own skill set. So the first thing Mindy recommends is to watch a ton of TV and really look at it through a new lens. And so she mentions that even if a show that is totally different than something you would ever want to do, so in your case, maybe a book that is totally different than something you would ever want to do, you can always find something in it that you can use yourself. She shares the example of how the family was portrayed in the show Pachinko, a show that is so totally different than her show Never Have I Ever, but she used story elements from this show to inform choices with Never Have I Ever. She also shares the example of how when she watched Sex and the City, she thought it was groundbreaking that another character in the show could be narrating another character's life. So for example, Carrie Bradshaw would go through her dating dilemmas and then she would say something like, meanwhile across town, Miranda was struggling with XYZ. So there's so many elements that you can find, and when we translate into this into books, I think of this in terms of multimedia within books. A book that I really loved as a teenager was called The Year of Secret Assignments, and it was just written in letters from characters to one another. Or a more relevant book to this day would be Daisy Jones and the Six. It is written in interview format. And in my first book, Connecting Flights, I have one part of the book where I share a newspaper article. So it's just seeing what is done, what is working, what you like, and what you resonate with. This is all eventually going to lead to you building your author voice. So then Mindy goes and she talks about being jealous of comedy cliques and kind of having to break through to find success. And I hadn't heard about this fun fact before, but kind of the way that she got her gig on The Office is that she had a play in New York called Matt and Ben, and it was about Matt Damon and Ben Affleck being friends before they got famous. And this show became popular in New York simply because celebrities were coming to see it, and that's how she was hired from The Office. Or I can't remember if it was the NYC one, but this Matt and Ben was really successful in New York, and then it went to LA and it wasn't as successful, which hurt. And I think that is when the producer of The Office came to her. her key takeaways in this first sort of introduction is to find ways to connect to characters that are totally different from you. And this takeaway comes from how she mentioned she first imagined herself writing, oh, my camera is shaking, how she first imagined herself writing on a show of like ladies with disposable income, like super highly empowered woman. And then her first big writing gig that she got was she was writing about a paper company in Pennsylvania, aka The Office, which we know and love today, but at the time it was not her ideal gig. But she talks about how although she couldn't directly relate to Michael, she could relate to wanting to not make a fool of herself, wanting to be respected, wanting everyone to like her. So even if you think something is totally way off the mark of what you could create, see if you can find something in there with the characters that resonate with you. Again, I took so many notes when writing this class, so this is why you will see me looking down. She also mentioned a very practical takeaway is to practice writing in another person's voice. So if we think of books, maybe as a kid, I used to really love the Lemony Snicket series of Unfortunate Events, and I did this technique without realizing it because this is the literature I was exposed to at the time, but when I practiced writing as a kid, I was kind of mimicking that voice. So maybe if you pick up, I don't know, I'm looking at my bookshelf. I have Legends and Lattes here. I haven't read it yet, but it'd be interesting to go to the main character and just write maybe a paragraph in someone's voice. Our writing brain is a muscle, so it's important that we work it in any way that we can. Okay. And then she talks about how it was a mistake for her to just go to her computer and start writing. She talks about how the process of writing starts way before she even sits down at her computer and starts typing. And this is essentially where we get more into the nitty-gritty of outlining. So for those of you that are struggling with outlining, please stick around. I think this is going to be super, super helpful. So she says that the part of going to the computer, sitting down and typing is actually the last part of writing. But the first part is the preparation and the generating ideas. So, and then she begins to say that the premise of Sex Lives of College Girls actually came from the movie The Social Network, which is a totally different vibe, but it was from watching the behind the scenes of these guys in an elite school. She wanted that from a female perspective, and that's how the show Sex Lives of College Girls was born. So she wanted less frat bad boys, but from a female perspective. And then she gives us another writing assignment, which is to carry around a stack of note cards for a week and jot down anything you find funny. A scenario, a bit of dialogue, a character idea. And I personally think that this will work with TV shows, books, movie, any media you consume. I don't think this matters. It has to be translated to books entirely. But I like the idea of actually writing it down because in the moment you might laugh, you might think, wow, that is great storytelling. I do that all the time. And then you don't write it down, so you don't really have a reference point of the things that you've liked. And it'd be really interesting to keep track of it because chances are you're going to see a pattern of sort of storytelling elements that you like and you feel like you would try to use yourself. And then she goes into the Holy Trinity to a great pilot. This includes character, structure, and dialogue. And then she goes on to say how many of the characters that she writes sees themselves as no one recognizing how special they are and they just want to prove something to the world because resonates with her deeply. And so then this should be no surprise to any of us, but she says to write great characters, you need to take time to build their backstories. So she talks about Devi in Never Have I Ever, and she talks about a specific prompt we can use called She's the Kind of Person Who. So Devi Vishakumar is the kind of person who shows up 45 minutes to an SAT exam. So if you think about your own characters, you can put they're the kind of person who, and then just keep writing an entire list. Then she talks about Leighton Murray, one of my favorite characters in the Sex Lives of College Girls, and she puts her in a specific fake scenario of what would she do if she was stuck in an elevator. Well, if Leighton Murray was stuck in an elevator, she would call 911 and say, "Hi, I'm a VIP, 3 generations, have given millions to this school, I have a manicure appointment, I need to get the hell out of here." I just loved this specific scenario because as someone that has watched the show and is a fan of the show, it is just so fitting, and I'm already thinking of specific scenarios that I can put some of my own characters in. So then we get another writing assignment, which is to put your characters in 3 different high-stakes scenarios and imagine how they would react. And then she goes on to talk about structure. So structure she describes as the Christmas tree that we put all ornaments on the script on. And this is where it gets really nitty-gritty into comedy scripts specifically, but she says that most comedy scripts have a 3-act structure, so this can be true in a lot of writing, with an A and a B and a C story. So she does this with index cards that she puts on a bulletin board. She likes that it's colorful and pleasing. She refers to this as a crafts project, and she likes seeing the story laid out in front of her because it just feels way more accessible. And then she will start writing scenes on her laptop while looking at her colorful board. So I just see this as the main plot and the B plots. So the A story is the main storyline that involves your protagonist. This is central to the conflict or goal, and it takes up most of the time. The B story in comedy writing is the second storyline with secondary characters. It has a subplot, but it still needs to be related to the main story. And the C story is a minor subplot with minor characters, and in TV this is referred to as a runner, and it served as some comic relief or background texture. And most often the C story, if there's issues with timing the episodes too long, the C story naturally is the first thing to get cut. So then we have another writing assignment for you. In bullet points, write a pilot story for your main character that has a beginning, middle, and end, and shows them overcoming a problem. And this ends with the character changing in some way. So although we're not writing a pilot here, you can think of this as maybe the first chapter of your book, because she then just begins to describe things like the inciting incident. So she talks about in the Mindy Project, a man leaves this doctor, which is like Mindy's character, for a girl who sells bagel at the hospital, and then later on the main character gets so drunk at a wedding that she steals a bike and crashes into a lake or a swimming pool. And so that's that backstory built there. She talks a little bit of the art of a cold open, which sets the tone of a show. Again, you can think of this as your first chapter as well. And she talks about really needing people to get to watch the next episode. This is referred to as a throw forward and a cliffhanger. Again, we can apply this for chapters. We want people to keep reading. We don't want them to put our book down. We want to write the types of books where people are like, oh, just one more chapter, and it keeps ending on a cliffhanger. So you want to get people hooked. And so a point she mentions is that in TV, you can steal the inciting incident of the next episode and put it at the end of the next episode, if that makes any sense at all. She then talks about how you don't always have to be a good writer, you just have to be a good talker. So this is really interesting, and I've been thinking lately on how sometimes I'll just envision scenes from my books when just doing chores around the house. I won't actually write them down because I don't necessarily feel like writing, but this really puts into perspectives and that maybe we should start dictating our stories. And I know there are some people on here that have started that. I just haven't yet, but I think it wouldn't be a bad idea. So here's a writing assignment. Record yourself talking from the perspective of your character, transcribe the recording, and mine it for useful bits of dialogue. This, I think, would come in really, really useful for those that really struggle with writing dialogue. And I remember as a kid, like even when I was studying for like a social studies exam, I was really bad at just like remembering facts and dates, but when I translated it to characters talking to one another about a certain conflict, I would be more likely to remember that. So she talks a little bit about editing yourself, and she talks about not scrutinizing the first draft as writing it. And then she says put it away, but she doesn't follow the traditional advice of like put it away for months and then come back later. It's more like just put it away for hours, and then when you go back and look at it, if scenes within it is not directly related to your plot, then they have to go. And just a side note, as I was watching this masterclass and taking notes, I saw there was B-roll of Mindy typing in this sort of like bed writing desk, and now I really want one of these. And then she also talks about how a rule for all writing is that less is more. So per Mindy, when the page count goes down, monologue gets shorter, people can be more succinct, and people are more articulate and more passionate in TV than we are in real life. And perhaps that is true for fiction novels as well. And she also talks about how when you don't have a writer's room, it's critical to have a close confidant to read something and give you their thoughts. So whether this is someone you know personally that will read it and give you their thoughts, or whether it's a beta reader that you hired, it's just the more eyeballs on your work, the better, just to kind of get a sense of how it's landing. And then she has a chapter on working with actors, which I thought was fascinating. She talks about how table reads are the most glamorous and fun days because you can see your script come to life in certain ways that actors can deliver it. She talks about seeing the magic of a performer transforming and elevating their dialogue. Like if you think of the character Michael, who's just so obnoxious, but we think of Steve Carell performing Michael, he just gives that character a specific touch that you wouldn't have been able to see dimensions of that character as well. She also refers to when they hired Davey for Never Have I Ever, a 17-year-old actor with no formal acting experience from Toronto, just kind of the cadence and the way this actress spoke added a new dimension to Davey that she couldn't have seen on the page otherwise. So this I couldn't directly compare to writing our books, again, unless like you become a showrunner of a series or something crazy. But I have been watching some content on how to turn your book into an audiobook, and as authors, depending on how you go about things, you do have a say on which voice actors you hire. And again, you wouldn't meet the voice actor directly or give them any directions, but I just kind of thought of like, that's the most similar thing I can think of is to like having your book be table read by an actor. And then she goes on to talk about show don't tell. She says as comedy writer, she has to remind herself that it is a visual medium. And she's very transparent in her ego of how thinking that like, no, my words are just enough. It's perfect, guys. You just need my words. You just need my script. Where in reality, the director comes in and maybe tells the character to pause and silence and flip through a book and all sorts of things that can't be conveyed in dialogue alone. So she talks about remembering this as a physical medium, and I think that's important for books too, because as we know, our books aren't only dialogue. There's a lot of other things that happen in the book, and I struggle with this because dialogue, I feel, is one of my strong suits. So for me, this really helps me to think of maybe action scenes in the sense of like blocking. So blocking during TV is like, where is the character standing that, you know, everyone kind of gets this specific view of just thinking of our character's body language, or of thinking of how to maybe write in dramatic pauses, or even just how to write in like a fight or a combat scene, things like that, because the whole book is not just a conversation. Just the written words alone of the dialogue is not enough. And then she talks about over preparing. So Mindy talks about how well she was working on the set of The Office as a writer. She was kind of secretly preparing like her departure to work on her own things. So very performative. She states she would come in really early and she would leave really late. Even if she didn't have any work to do, she would continue to do this, because that way anytime like the director came in or the showrunner came in, she was there. You know, she could maybe get one-on-one time to talk to this person. She was there. It was performative. It shows she's a hard worker. She said she was the only person on staff who have never worked on a set before, so it was critical for her to fake it as she made it. And she said no matter where you are in your career, crafting your pitch is essential. So for writers, our pitch, we can think of that as the back blurb of our book. Say you run into someone at a party and you tell them that you're writing a book, kind of sheepishly, and they're like, oh my god, that's so cool, what is it about? And instead of info dumping them like 10 different scene plots, speaking from personal experience, you can actually summarize your plot in like three sentences. So she has some more practical things. Just looking at my notes here. She says you can create a document that knows the story but doesn't sound super rehearsed when you say it. So you can give yourself leeway to talk off the cuff. She reports anytime she had to do a pitch, it was never easy. She was never at ease, like if someone asked her about a certain show idea, but she could kind of perform it as like, oh yeah, just casual conversation. I'm thinking of this show called The Mindy Project where there's a female doctor who's kind of self-absorbed, but she's also a gynecologist and she really cares about her patients and she really wants to find love. And then she talks about after you establish yourself as a successful comedy writer, and she defines it. So establishing yourself as a successful comedy writer means that you have written on other shows that other people have created, and you have proven yourself indispensable on these shows that other people have created. Then one day you might sell a show of your own, and a network might let you be the boss of that show. And that means you are a showrunner. And honestly, just like incredible goals, right? Like the thought of, I love writing, but the thought of working in a writer's room with a bunch of other authors, as fun as it sounds, just like the pressure of TV and network sounds really scary to me. But I think as authors, we can compare this to a book agent. And I think as writers, it's good to be readers. But I do not think as writers that we have to be editors to then become writers. So, but we can compare to a book agent in the sense of, oh, this agent thinks your pitch is good enough that commercially it might sell, and commercially the general public might want it if you are choosing to publish traditionally or become a hybrid author, which is one of my goals, which is to have a combination of self-published works and traditionally published works. So then she talks about being a good showrunner, and this is just fascinating, and it might not directly apply to being an author, but maybe you have a character in an upcoming book that is a showrunner. If you do, let me know, or also let me know what your favorite show is that created by Mindy Kaling. I just think this was so juicy, and for an hour and 30 minutes, I believe the length was, it was such a good masterclass. So, being a good showrunner. I'm just going to look at my notes here. So, this means that you have to be obsessed with detail, you have to be patient, you have to be a timely and effective communicator with 125 people on set. That is madness. My introvert self has no desire to be a showrunner, but wow, how fascinating to hear behind the scenes. So she says as a showrunner, you're essentially the translator of the script and the vision of the script, and you translate this vision over and over again to all the cast and all the crew members for every episode of the show. You also have to communicate budget, looks, the music scores you want, casting, and you also have to be a good salesman. So I see a showrunner as literally being the boss of the show. And she shares a story of like how the crew will have 10,000 questions for you in person and email. And she shares a really specific example of like, while you're walking to your car, you might be really excited to eat McDonald's, but then someone comes up to you and asks you a question, and you have to answer it patiently. And usually they are good questions because they're questions like, hey, how do you want us to get this prop? Or do you want us to do this? Do you want us to do this? And you might think it's just casual conversation, but no, they're listening to what you're saying. You're the boss, and they're going to go source that prop for you. So she says this is not a whimsical job, and you need to be extremely patient and decisive. And she says the worst showrunners are the ones who get impatient that the crew can't read their mind. So now, book translation. I think for any of you that are looking into also supplementing your income with book coaching or book editing, that last one is critical. The worst ones are the ones who get impatient that their crew can't read their mind. I feel I would be the worst client to a book editor. if I just assume that the editor is going to read my mind. I also feel like I would be the worst book coach or book editor if I just assume I read their mind and I assume I know what they want. So the communication of just kind of saying like, is this the point you're trying to get across here because it reads like this? Or what are you going for here? Of the art of just digging deeper within the book industry is going to serve you so well, I promise. And then she talks about a tone meeting, which I had never heard of before, but we can apply this to working with editors. If you work with an editor or a book coach that offers a call with you before they start editing, we can think of this as a tone meeting. So when she talks about a tone meeting, she says a way that something reads as funny on screen is because people are reacting to it. She states you only know that Michael Scott is being inappropriate because you cut to Angela's reaction of like, what the heck has he said? And so she says that there will be production meetings to talk about every scene and the intention of every scene. For example, this character has this secret, this one is angry about this one, which that informs how the actors block each other. And all these scenes are talked about with the director. So you need to be an expert communicator once you are shooting your own show. And I think we can really apply this to self-editing when we were going into our work in progress and going into each scene. If we don't know the intention of each scene, it's gonna be a mess because it's just you pantsed your way through it, you wrote a scene, it's fun, it's good, but how did it move the story along? So a personal example for me is I remember thinking that when this book came out, my debut novel, I originally thought that I was writing a cozy fantasy, which was low stakes, and I sent it off to beta readers. And I just said, like, what's your initial feedback of this draft? I just needed to get eyes on it. And they said, like, nothing really happens in this book. Your main character has no agency. It's not really much of a plot. It's just vibes. And I was kind of like, oh, but I think that's what I was going for, because isn't that what a cozy fantasy is? But I hadn't done enough research on cozy fantasy. And then after getting that feedback, I realized like, hey, I don't want a character that has no agency. And I realized I do want things to happen. I do want there to be higher stakes. So maybe I'm not actually writing a cozy fantasy. So essentially be clear on your own vision and communicate it to the team that you are working with. If you're working with editors, beta readers, kind of what you are going for, so then they can tell you if it lands. If you don't know what you're going for yet, you can just ask them how it reads. I remember when I hired a developmental editor, she shared her experience with me of hiring an editor who edited her book like a romance, even though she wasn't trying to write a romance. So I think it's really important to have those conversations up front. So Mindy then talks about facing rejection. So she states that the pilot of the Mindy project was turned into Universal and they read it, rejected it, and then the team sent the proposal somewhere else and they liked it and they wanted to shoot a pilot. And she says there are so many places where you will turn in the script for a pilot and they will say no. And she also said when she left the office, it was a huge risk because it's not like she could leave the office and then if it didn't work out, just come back on staff. So it was just sheer will to get her own work out there. And then she has a great section of working on ego as a comedy writer. And I just love this part because I loved how self-aware and transparent she was about her own ego. I even know for a lot of writers, like, it's our secret dream of like, wouldn't it be awesome if like my first book just happened to go viral? But you don't want to talk about that unless you like truly are a narcissist. So she kind of self-identifies as a narcissist, and she just says like after table reads you get to hear actors' unfiltered opinions. And at age 24 she was staffed in the office and sometimes her boss would just yell at her, and she never took screenwriting classes in college. Her entire experience was from that off Broadway show Matt and Ben that we mentioned earlier, but she just came into the room with this energy like, oh, I'm super excited. And she never felt that initial like, oh, I shouldn't be here, I don't belong here, which she admits is very strange because you would think you would feel some sort of imposter syndrome, but she just came in with like this attitude of like, I know what I'm doing. So she says if you can approximate that energy, she's like, it's very useful to have. And then she also says, as a comedy writer, get used to daily rejection, because most of the time your boss will look at you and move on silently. Like, you are just pitching so many jokes, so many one-liners throughout the day. So you have to develop really thick skin really fast. She says even the best comedy writers have their script thrown out in a page 1 rewrite. Essentially, the overall message I got from this is to embrace the unexpected, which is a message that I truly, truly resonate with. And so she says her journey wasn't easy. It wasn't for the faint of heart, but it worked out. And she kind of ends on a note that saying, if you have a path that people are saying like, oh, it's not going to work this way, she's like, just do this. If you have your own path with grit, determination, I kind of took it as stay in your own lane, follow your goals, and you will succeed. So that was Mindy Kaling's masterclass summarized with some book translations for you. Let me know if you have a favorite Mindy Kaling show or just your initial thoughts on the masterclass, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!